Are you sitting comfortably? Good. Here we go. The Book of Chiellini, chapter 25, verse 23,495. Yes, but Tottenham. It's the history of the Tottenham. They always created many chances and score so much. But at the end, they miss always something to arrive. At the end, we believe in the history. Oh, we are so back. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show. Joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you so much as always for doing so. Thank you so much for making this a part of your morning routines. It is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much as always for tuning in on what is a lovely, lovely day. Good morning to you all joining us live in the chat box. If you haven't dropped a like on the video, please make sure that you do and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. If you wanted to know what book I actually used, it was The Mixer's Manual. I was like, I just need to find any book I grabbed off the shelf, and the Mrs. Cocktail book did that perfectly well. But it does say the Cocktail Bible, I should say. So it's as close as I could find to a biblical text in the house at 2 minutes notice when I was already late for the show. But good morning to you all. Thank you so much for tuning in. Martin Harvey, good morning to you, to Steve, to Evan, good morning to Loga, Amber Lee, Barry, good morning to you, to Oslo, to Kirill, to Baz, Martin, we've got Carl, we've got Paul, we've got Bruce, Oslo Gooner in the chat box as well. Anyone else? Alex, of course, there's loads of you. Alex T, Owen, Abed's in the chat box as well. I mean, Spurs went to bed last night. Pretty sad, didn't they? Ryan, good morning to you. To James, to Mo, to Brian, to Eamon, good morning. And Donny, and Beans on Toast in the chat box today. Thank you so much, always, for tuning in. We start with there is only one place to start, which is, oh, we are so back. Lovely stuff. The season's here, and Spurs do not disappoint. PSG, with absolutely zero pre-season preparation, managed to claw their way back to a European Super Cup victory, despite going 2-0 down to a fully prepared Tottenham side who had already had their pre-season and full preparations, everybody fit and ready to go. The last game that PSG played before this, I believe, was something like 5 weeks prior. They'd not played a game. In fact, there were suggestions that PSG were partying only 6 or 7 days ago. I don't know how true that is, but it is something I saw on my social media feed that I'm definitely choosing to believe. They'll certainly be partying. Well, they should. I'm certainly sure they would have been partying yesterday. But yeah, absolutely incredible. Brilliant to watch, brilliant to enjoy. I was at football training last night, and obviously it meant I missed kind of the first half, and we went to the pub after we finished training, and I walked in there with an Arsenal shirt on, obviously looking a little bit frustrated to know that Spurs at that point were winning and looking like they were heading towards yet another trophy. And I left before the full-time whistle. I was like, the owner of the pub's a big Spurs fan. I was like, I do not need to be here. I do not need to have to sit through the celebrations again. So I left, and on the way home, still chucked the radio on and somehow maintained my composure on the road while driving back to my house, while a 94th or 5th minute equaliser from friend of the show, Gonçalo Ramos, of course, friend of the show, I say, because Gonçalo Ramos, of course, has sent his well wishes to many a TGT listener before, when he was only a youngster at Benfica. Still mad, that video, that if you go back and watch one of our shows we did where we got some brilliant guests to say hello to our members, and Gonçalo Ramos was one of those that did. It still makes me laugh. So I'm going to see if I can find that video, but it's one of the funniest clips, like, and ironic clips now ever, because, well, he's become the player that he's become. If you're a long-time listener of the channel, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about regarding that video. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Loved it. So good. And, the season's here and we can start enjoying it. And hopefully Arsenal can now put to pay their hopes of a trophy this season as well. Moving into today's main stories, however, and bringing it really back round to Arsenal, Jack Wilshere will not become a new Arsenal under-21s coach. Max Porter, according to James McNicholas of The Athletic, is said to be the favourite. He, of course, was the assistant coach to Mehmet Ali and took charge of a lot of the under-19s games in the UEFA Youth League as well. But Jack Wilshere, despite claims that he would be returning to Arsenal, has decided against the opportunity. He said, or rather not he said, but the reports are that he is instead focusing on senior management and trying to move into a senior position rather than specifically a youth position as well. But certainly, just very, very good. Very, very good indeed. I know it's not very, very good indeed that Jack Wilshere. I'm still thinking about Spurs losing in my head. Oh, it's taking over me. But it's very good, I think, for Wilshere that he does focus on that senior kind of pathway to senior management. That is the right pathway for him. And I think, going back into youth football after going into senior assistant coaching with Norwich, I think he does need to find that next step for him. And that probably isn't with the Arsenal team, despite the fact I would have loved, of course, to see him back at the Arsenal. Moving into transfer news, and Rafael Leao, of course, a lot of fans we know, a lot of fans in our chats. Anthony, I'm thinking about you, of course, would have loved to have seen him at the club for the forthcoming season. However, unfortunately, I do hate to break it to you, Fabrizio Romano reporting yesterday off the back of no rumours, really. I mean, the only people that have really been discussing Leao is kind of just loosely amongst us as we talk about him as a potential option. Leao ultimately will not be joining Arsenal. Fabrizio Romano has said that he is not going to be joining the club or leaving AC Milan at all during this forthcoming or this present summer transfer window. He is not going to be going anywhere. So, yes, no Leao for Arsenal. Sorry to disappoint fans out there, but yes, not going to be at the club. But the main story that kind of sparked the biggest reaction amongst supporters was that of Alexander Zinchenko. Zinchenko's his current book, if you like. His current book, of course, that is already out, called Believe, is receiving an update. And the update to his book includes excerpts, of course, from the current season and his thoughts around the previous season. And The Athletic have released early and have been, given early access to some of these quotes that have come out, where Zinchenko writes about his torrid time last season. I'll read you some of those quotes. You can go over to the Athletic website and read, all of them in their entirety. But he says, a small problem with my calf kept me out of action in the month of September. A knock here, a knock there, but I was otherwise fit for most of the campaign. However, he would go on to say, I was basically out of the starting 11 altogether, bar a few isolated matches. In pure personal terms, it was easily the worst season I have ever experienced as a professional. Now, he also goes on to talk about Mikel Arteta, and some of the stuff that he says, I found quite difficult reading. Not in the sense of I struggled to read it because I felt so sorry for Zinchenko, but rather bluntly, I couldn't help but find myself falling into a pit of spotting hypocrisy and contradiction amongst the words used. He says, the sense of rejection you feel if your manager no longer believes in you can take the stuffing out of you, even if you're the most resilient guy on the planet. Sitting on the bench in the Premier League for a very generous wage packet is obviously still a privilege, the kind of problem that billions of people on this planet would swap their much tougher lives for in a heartbeat. Trust me, as a Ukrainian, I'm aware of that every single minute. But every footballer started playing because they loved to play the game. A big part of your life missing without it. Imagine this little boy who's dedicated his entire existence to becoming good at one particular thing, and then finds at 28 that he's essentially no longer needed, and there are others who can do the job for him. It's not a nice feeling. Well, so there is obviously a number of kind of avenues you can take. And I've spoken to a number of people who feel a variety of different opinions around these quotes. Laura Kurt Francis, I think, summed it up pretty well with her video, as she always does, where she imitated the PR person behind the book, which I thought it was great. Go and give that a watch if you haven't done so already. I feel, and to be fair, look, he goes on within this book and goes on to talk about how impressed he is with Miles Lewis-Skelly. And he says that, you know, he's made the left back position his own. He's a special talent. What he's done is unbelievable. He talks about how he's heard stories about other young players being ganged up on by older players that are kind of in their same position and defending their territory. And, you know, he talks about, you know, how great Miles is and what a talent he is. I just can't help but feel as though when he talks about, you know, this idea that he's got a sense of rejection and the manager no longer believes in him, I think it kind of undermines the points he makes about Lewis-Skelly. Because to in one breath say the manager no longer believes in me, and in the other breath talk about Miles Lewis-Skelly in glowing terms, those two things are a contradiction. Because if you're understanding and appreciative of the talent and the special abilities of this player who has taken your spot, you can't then turn around and say that the manager has lost belief in you. The manager hasn't lost belief in Zinchenko. The manager has seen the talent, the brilliance, the performances of this other player who happens to be Miles Lewis-Skelly, and an 18-year-old who goes on to make his England debut and score at Wembley on his first appearance, in completely justifying that role. But Zinchenko, to be frank, when has played, and I think he had a decent season when he played games last season, but there were so many elements of Zinchenko's game when he did play during big moments that were costing to Arsenal. Turning over of possession, being caught out at the back. There were some really good moments too. And I would be focusing on that if he was leaving kind of just without these comments. But because these comments have emerged and these quotes are there, it kind of leaves a bit of a saltiness, I think. And he goes on in those excerpts also to say that, you know, he, you know, I could only blame myself, he says. If I don't play, it means that I didn't work hard enough, didn't do enough, didn't play well enough. I'm never a player who runs to the manager, complains, or asks tons of questions. But in the same text, he says that the manager has lost belief in him and he feels a sense of rejection. That's putting the emphasis on Arteta, despite later on saying, I can only blame myself. That doesn't align. That doesn't correspond. That's, in my opinion, a contradictory thing. So I empathize with him. It sucks when you're a player and you don't play. It does. It's not an enjoyable experience, I am sure, despite the fact you get an incredible amount of money. A huge, 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 huge amount of money. And the book sales, of course, and I don't know where where the book's kind of profits are going. It wouldn't surprise me, knowing, you know, the type of person Zinchenko is, that they're going to a great cause, probably to support Ukraine. I wouldn't be surprised at all. But they are stocked in the Arsenal armory. You often see them in there. And I don't know if they're going to be stocking the updated version, which talks about, you know, the manager in those terms of losing belief in him and a sense of rejection. I just sense contradiction there. And I also think and this is just my honest opinion, that this comes out at the worst possible time. These comments are coming out at the worst possible time. If they came out like a month later, after the transfer window closed, I don't think there'd be an issue at all. I don't think there'd be a problem whatsoever. And I think that would be fine. If he'd have moved, like if he'd have left, been sold, Arsenal got the transfer fee that's reflective of his value, and it came out in a month's time, I don't think I'd even bat an eyelid, to be honest. But because it's happening now, while Arsenal are trying to maximise from a potential sale, I think there is an argument there, in my opinion, that could affect his transfer value and Arsenal's strength of a negotiating standpoint. So that's also something to go on. And I know that not everyone agrees with that. And I know I can see people in the chat box that don't agree with that either. It's just my opinion. But, and this is coming from someone who likes Zinchenko. Like, I liked him as a player. You know, I'd liked what he's given to Arsenal. But I haven't agreed with everything that he said, personally. There are things that he has said I don't agree with, not just in the book, but outside of that. So but I don't dislike the guy. So it's not personal. I want to be very clear on that. It's not personal for me, but I just don't think it's very well timed. And I just think that there is a contradiction there regarding saying he doesn't complain and doesn't go to the manager and all this, but then in a book complains, says that he wasn't really injured and was available but wasn't picked. And I think that the reason why he wasn't picked was because of the historic consistent mistakes that have emerged in his game at Arsenal and the presence of a very exciting talent in Miles Lewis-Skelly. That's just my opinion. So, but you're entitled to disagree, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in part 2. So let's go to part 2. Your questions, your comments, your thoughts, and more right after this. Right, let's go to the chat box, shall we, and tackle some of your thoughts. I know there's a lot of people who've got some very strong views and less strong views and some different views, of course, to me. We're going to go through as many of them and as varied as many of them as well. Matt G says he thinks that he's cut his value in half with these comments. Carrie Ann, though, says, I don't feel that it is a contradiction. I read it as he blames himself for the fact that he has a manager that has lost faith in him. He is just honest about his feelings. Amberley says, yes, this is the problem. He's done a Torreira and probably tanked his value. That was the player that came to my mind. Torreira came to my mind when I was reading these comments. And Torreira went through a horrible experience, of course, towards the end of his time at Arsenal regarding his family. But obviously, a lot of his comments and kind of the situation that happens towards the end of his time at Arsenal completely destroyed his value to the club, and it ended up getting a very small fee for him. Sabre says people need to stop finding excuses to murd on our players. I'd never heard that word before. What does murd mean? Is that just I'm assuming it's a mistake because I don't know what that word means. But I'll say, like, be harsh about our players. He said absolutely nothing wrong. Again, it's an opinion. I'm not the type to do that. You know, you should, from the perspective of, someone who's really quite optimistic and quite a positive person, I'm not the type to look for stuff like that. I'm not the type to look for the negativity at all. So personally, I feel that stands as quite a firm kind of foundation to hold an opinion of this ilk, because it's not a trend of mine. I don't tend to do that. Don Bruce says, Tom, it's not like Zinchenko cared about who he replaced when he joined. It's the hypocrisy, similar to Newcastle fans who would go off about Isak rumours but happy about rumours of transfers for themselves. I guess you could make that comparison with Liverpool fans, of course, with Trent Alexander-Arnold, and then, of course, the expectation that Isak would do anything he can to move to Liverpool. So I guess there's hypocrisy there. But I don't know if that's the same as this. I just think the hypocrisy exists when he talks about not blaming himself and not being someone who complains, but in the same text, to me, comes across like he's complaining and feels, hard done by. And I think underplays the irony of the privilege, but also the Miles Lewis-Skelly element as well. It was important that he addressed Miles Lewis-Skelly, and he does, but I don't think anything he said about Miles Lewis-Skelly could have helped what came prior to that in the quotes that we got. Oh, okay. Murdered the French word. Okay. Well, we're going for different languages, Sabre. Fair enough. We're going into French today. Pato says, based on what you read, I don't see the guy saying or having done anything wrong here. The manager has lost faith in him. That is the reality. As a club, we have moved on from him to someone else. I don't necessarily look at it as kind of losing faith. I just look at it as somebody has ousted him from two players. Calafiori and Lewis Skelly have ousted Zinchenko through their own performances. It's not to do with the manager losing belief or a sense of rejection. Those players have just been better and so have earned that right to play those games. Anne says, how do you reconcile Zinni saying that he just wants to play with the Athletics, reporting that he'll sit on a big salary and go for free? So this is obviously another thing that's been reported. But the problem with this is that we don't know how real it is. If the reports that Zinchenko would be willing to stay for another season, see out his contract, and leave on a free. If that is true, and it's a big if, we don't know. Hypothetically, if that's the case, for those of you that don't think there's a hypocrisy, surely then there is, if that's the case. Now, I don't know if there is that scenario. But if he's happy to sit on the bench and claim his wage for the final year of his contract, knowing he's not really going to play, because you've got Miles Lewis-Skelly and you've got Calafiori and you've got Kivior, then surely there's a hypocrisy there. Surely he should be seeking a move away from the club as a result of what we're hearing. Do you know what I mean? Based on those quotes, surely we should be seeing him make a move away from Arsenal this summer. Like if he ended up staying, it would be very strange if he ended up staying after seeing these quotes. That's kind of how I would feel about that. So maybe there's a potential hypocrisy to come, but yeah, who knows? Not Too Busy thinks that we're overanalyzing the situation, which is very possible. This is a period of the window where news is not exactly forthcoming. So we do tend to kind of focus in on these types of stories, perhaps to a greater extent than they actually are worthy of. But it's still a talking point, and we like having these discussions. Jakob says he is allowed to be sad about the year he has had. It's okay to feel rejected. It's just feelings, and that's what you put in a book. I don't hear anything scathing about the club or Arteta. Samuel says, hi, Tom. I don't think it has to be one or the other. The manager has lost faith in him and has replacements for him at the same time. Stu says, morning, Tom. Any upgrade on the stadium capacity? Nothing at the moment, mate. Not heard anything to suggest that's kind of moving ahead right now, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means we've not heard anything yet. Dr. Ken says Zinchenko lost his position well before Miles Lewis-Skelly appeared, so the manager did lose faith in. I mean, he lost his position because of Calafiori before that. Again, Calafiori came in, both of them had the same opportunity to play, and Zinchenko got injured at the start of the season, which allowed Calafiori to get more opportunities and minutes, of course. So again, it's the injuries that he suffered contributed to that as well and allowed other players to get that opportunity too. Rafso says he's just being honest. Things are nuanced, and you are listing how Arteta may have lost faith in him. In my opinion, he took accountability. Both can be true. I wish it came out after the window, though. I think that's the biggest thing here. I think it's the timing. The timing of it is the big one. If it came out after the window closed, I think it'd be fine. As I said, I probably wouldn't bat an eyelid at it. But I think the over-analysis or the extra analysis, or in some people's minds, the unnecessary analysis, I think comes about because it's come out with 2-3 weeks of the window left and Arsenal in a position where they're trying to sell him. So I think that's the bigger issue from a transfer perspective. Christian says, did you see the Rashford comments on the rest is football? I think it was slightly worse than Zinchenko. Let me have a quick look. Rashford, the rest is football. Let's have a look. Former Manchester United forward says, club are in no man's land and need to stick to a plan. Let's see if I can get all the quotes. He says, you see it with any team that's been successful over a period of time. They have principles that any coach that comes in, any player that comes in has to align to these principles or be able to add to these principles. Whereas at the times, I feel like United have just been, we're hungry to win, so we'll always try to adapt to sign players that fit this system, but it's reactionary. If your direction is always changing, you can't expect to be able to win the league. Yeah, you might win some cup tournaments, but it's because you do have a good coach and you do have good players and you have the match winners in your team. You're not there by accident. We've been way below where we deem United to be. But then if you take a step back, which you've been able to do, especially over the last 6 months, what do you expect? He carries on and says, people say that we've been in transition for years. To be in a transition, you have to start the transition. So it's like the actual transition's not started yet. To start a transition, you have to make a plan and stick to it. So this is the thing that I feel it's not easy, because if it's not going well, the fans' demands change. But this is where I speak about realistic and what your situation is. I feel like we've had that many different managers and different ideas and different strategies in order to win. And you end up in the middle of, you end up in no man's land. The problem with these quotes is that he's still a Man United player. He's just on loan. If he'd have left permanently, then having such a scathing opinion of your club, you're probably more entitled to it. Because you're still employed by Man United and you're on loan, it doesn't sound great. It doesn't sound great at all. So I could see, why Christian perhaps thinks they're slightly worse comments. Let's talk about the Adams stuff, shall we? So Barry Hemmings says here, Adams is a true captain. So Tony Adams speaking this week, and the quotes emerged yesterday, came out and said that he feels that Arteta has a big decision to make, and that is to make Declan Rice the new club captain. Let me see if I can get you the exact quotes of what Tony Adams said. He says, I think he's got a really big call to make this year, and for me, he hasn't done it. And the call is to make Declan Rice the captain. I think Declan is my kind of captain, and what it might do, it might free Odegaard up to play with a more freedom. I think he's an Arsenal kind of leader. I think he is. He's good in the dressing room, around the training camp. He's got standards. He's got principles. He's got, I can see the man that he's a proper player and a proper captain. You are not going to win the league with Odegaard as captain. It's quite a scathing end of that quote. It was probably fine, up until he said, you are not going to win the league with Odegaard as captain. I'll give you my view. I personally feel that it would be more detrimental to Arsenal to take captaincy away from Odegaard and hand it to another player. If Odegaard was leaving and we had to pick the next captain, it would probably be Declan Rice. I don't think there's too much controversy about that. If Odegaard wasn't going to be the captain, the next captain alongside Bukayo Saka would probably be Declan Rice. I don't really have too much of a problem with that. Saka, of course, has, I think, been the number 2 for quite some time because of his seniority and his experience with the club and his attachment to Arsenal as well. You could argue that Gabriel could be potentially one of those players as well that takes the armband too. But I think that Declan Rice would be a very worthy Arsenal captain if he was ever to be given the armband. I don't think that's up for debate. I don't think that's a debate at all. I think that Declan Rice would be a very worthy captain indeed. The debate comes from this idea that we should take the captaincy from Odegaard and give it to Declan Rice. Nick says, Arsblog says the interview was shot in Dublin weeks ago. Context needed pre-purchases. I don't know if that changes the context too much for me that it was filmed weeks ago and it's coming out now. It's even if it was done weeks ago, thinking about the situation weeks ago before the season started, it's an absolute nonsense. It's an absolute nonsense to take away the captaincy from the existing captain who is still at the club, who has taken Arsenal to the fact that they're back in relevancy for title contention, that has had some excellent seasons. Not last season, he was affected by injury. I think we could all see that. Anyone with a brain could see that Odegaard obviously was affected by the injury that he suffered at the beginning of the season, and because of the shortness in our squad, really never was able to recover efficiently. And I think also that you've seen during this preseason, Odegaard looks a lot sharper. He looks a lot better. I also think he has been a very good captain. I think he is excellent at welcoming new players into the group and helping them integrate. I think he is a leader on the field, by example. I think he's an excellent dressing room presence. And I also think that the captain's armband in itself is not, in 2025, a big thing. I don't think who holds the captain's armband is a big thing at all in terms of what it means, what it gives you in terms of kind of privileges or power. I think that you can have within a group leaders that don't need an armband. On top of that, I would say what makes the captain's armband a big thing is if you do something controversial with it, which is to take it off of somebody, then that becomes a big thing. Then the armband becomes something. If you take the armband off of Ødegaard and give the armband to Rice, that creates a situation. It creates a scenario. It creates a story. If you keep the armband on Ødegaard and unofficially have Rice as one of your captains in the group, there's no story. There's no controversy. There's nothing to discourage. There's nothing to unsettle. There's nothing to talk about. But if you take the armband off a player and give it to somebody else, in my opinion, the downsides of the impact that has on not just that player, but the disharmony that it could create in the group who feel that that's not. I mean, look at the divide here. If there's a divide in how I feel and how you feel, and of course, people in the chat box think it's the right thing to do, and people like me think it's the wrong thing to do, and we're divided on this topic, you can be sure that the players in the dressing room would be also divided in their opinions as well. So why create that divide? Why even put it up as a thing? You don't need a piece of fabric to be a leader or a captain in a group. Ødegaard's responsibilities as a captain extend, I don't think, too far beyond the purview of the leadership qualities that Rice has in the dressing room either. You will watch the Amazon documentary. You all saw how many vocal voices there were in that dressing room, be that Granit Xhaka, be that Aaron Ramsdale. There was lots of vocal people in those dressing rooms, you know. And there's always something made of, is Ødegaard vocal enough as a captain? Does he shout at his teammates enough? Is he the type to kind of like galvanise them? Well, you know, I go to Arsenal every single week. I watch Arsenal every single week in the flesh, and I see it all the time. I see him galvanising teammates. I see him galvanising supporters in the stadium. I see him leading his team out. I see him being the captain that has helped to take Arsenal back to title relevancy and establish themselves back amongst the biggest elite competitions in the world, which Arsenal haven't been at the table at for the better part of 1.5 decades. So that's my view on it. But I'd love yours. So I'm going to scroll through the chat and get some of your thoughts, because I know there is going to be some people who feel differently. Matt says, I don't understand the fans who say Ødegaard will improve as a player if you take the captaincy away from him. I don't particularly either, Matt. I don't really see how it takes any weight or anything off of him at all. Playing for Arsenal, being in that number 10 role or number 8 role is an incredible weight of pressure, and he's dealt with that very, very well. Raf says, I'm sorry, the moment that he said Rice is the player, better than Arteta, he's a winner, you knew it was personal. He seems bitter, and how does it help the team? He's had previous as well. It's self-serving, in my opinion. Cyrus says, some of these former players should keep their opinions to themselves. Soup says, I can't deny, I agree with Adams for the most part. I do, however, think that we can win the league with Ødegaard as captain. Joe says, I think taking the armband off Ødegaard and giving to Rice could cause unnecessary problems with Saka, Gabriel, if they think they deserved it and also got overlooked, which I think is a fair point, because Saka so far has been the guy that's received the armband when Ødegaard's not in the field. So to suddenly see that taken off Ødegaard and not given to the guy that's been the number 2 could also create something of a bit of a drama. AFC DNB says the issue is Mikel is likely to drop a player that isn't performing and less likely to drop a captain. It's an issue. I mean, at what point would we have really dropped Ødegaard for who? Last season, we had so many injuries when he wasn't performing particularly well. And when Ethan Nwaneri was coming into the team, it was to play instead of Saka, who was also injured for 4 months of the season. So it wasn't like there was an obvious time that Ødegaard would have been dropped or would have been brought off. I would have taken him off in games as a substitute earlier. I don't necessarily think that it's the captaincy that keeps Ødegaard on the field. I think it's Ødegaard's capacity to win you a game with an amazing pass or a brilliant moment from outside the box or a goal. I think it's that quality that keeps Ødegaard on the field, not the fact that he has the armband. Aoife says, I will never understand how fans get so obsessed with who has the armband when you only see these guys 2 hours a week. We have absolutely no idea how their daily lives go. We also don't know how on earth they act besides that documentary behind the scenes as the captain. Who are they? Who is Tony Adams? Who are we to know those things? Amberly says, I feel bad for Ødegaard. The amount of disrespect he's been given for one poor injury hit season after being brilliant for us is way too much. Stephen says, hey, Tom, has the chances of us signing Eze gone up in the last couple of days? The longer it goes on, the more chance that we have of signing him. Well, the only thing that I would add to that point, just if we do take a quick tangent on the Eze thing, is that I feel as though if he was going to sign for Tottenham, and he really wanted to go to Tottenham, he would have gone to Tottenham. I feel that they would have done that deal. But I feel as though the way in which this is dragged out, that's the only thing that gives me that little smidge of hope that there is a chance that it will still happen. But Arsenal need to move players on. They need to sell. Players need to leave. That's the only way they can make that move. That's the only way they can work financially comfortably to add what I believe is a luxury additional player to the existing players we have in the squad. We have done the work to bring in 2 competitive players now for every single position in our squad, and Eze would be a bonus on top of that. And a bonus that I think we need, to be fair. But let's just wait and see. Again, back to the Rice captaincy thing. Jack says Rice will be captain when Ødegaard is moved on for Ethan and Max in a season or 2. I think you might be waiting a little bit longer than that, Jack, but we'll see. Stephen says, I think there's a bigger chance of buying Eze and selling Martin Ødegaard in January than there is of taking his captaincy. AJ, thank you so much for the kind donation. He says, as much as I would want Rice to be captain, we can't pretend there won't be issues taking it from Ødegaard if he's still in the team. It's not what we do. And I think that's a really good point. And I think that point about class, Tony Adams played at a time for Arsenal where, history, tradition was a lot more present in the minds, I think, of fans. But to see that really kind of, unfortunately, to be in such high favor of creating what would, in my opinion, create divide within the group, I think is a real shame. And I think also the idea that it is really scathing to say that you don't think that you can win a league, that the difference between Arsenal winning the league and not winning the league is Declan Rice being captain over Ødegaard. If the difference between Arsenal winning the league in the last 5 years is an armband, I think that's crazy. To suggest the difference is who holds the armband as opposed to our tactics, as opposed to our signings, as opposed to our in-game management, as opposed to the misfortune that we've suffered with injuries, as opposed to some of the crazy decisions that we've seen. All those things I've listed there are far greater influences than who has the armband when it comes to the difference between Arsenal winning and not winning a title. That's kind of where I stand on that. Wazza says, I think with the comments from Tony too, is that he came from an era where captains had to be loud, boisterous, and fearsome, almost Viking-like. Whereas captains now can be pretty quiet and reserved. And the thing is, I don't think Ødegaard is quiet or reserved. I just don't. I think he is a captain. I think he is a leader. I think he is inspirational to his players. I think you see that in the games. I think you see that in his performances. I think you see that with his gestures and with his words. I think you see all of that. He's very well media trained, and any conversations I've had with Ødegaard have always, the thing that always strikes you is he knows how to answer a question. He knows how to not create drama. And to be fair, when I've spoken to Declan as well, that also comes out. He doesn't particularly say anything too controversial, and I think he speaks very well as well. So, I just don't really think it's, again, I think it's just such a moot point in regards to kind of keeping it as Ødegaard. But I think it doesn't become a moot point when you take the armband off it. That creates division, and I think would have more detrimental impacts. Mark says, Tom, what are your thoughts on the Eze release clause? Is it confirmed by his agents or Crystal Palace that we want to avoid a Morgan Gibbs-White situation? I don't know if there's anything to do with Morgan Gibbs-White, but the release clause expires before the Premier League starts. Some people have reported it has already expired. Others have reported it expires tomorrow. My understanding is that the release clause has never really been something that is on Arsenal's list to be concerned by. If they're going to do a deal for Eze, that deal would be done through a negotiation, and they would also hope to do a deal below the value of that £67.5 million release clause. So the release clause, I think, is a bit of a moot point. The only thing that would change is if maybe Spurs suddenly go in and activate it, whether or not that would force Arsenal's hand, whether or not that would force Eze into a decision early. That's the only difference. But again, we don't know if it has or hasn't expired. Sami Mokbel and Fabrizio Romano have reported that it has expired. And we've also seen others, I think the Standard and Dom from the Standard and Ed Aarons have reported it expires tomorrow. So there's a lot of conflicting reports out there at the moment on this topic. Kirill, thank you so much for the kind donation from yourself. Says he is being honest and vulnerable and people laugh at him. That's Zinchenko, I think we're talking about here. I think it's sad. It's best he goes. I don't think there is a need to laugh in his face. I don't think anyone's laughing in his face. That's for sure. I just think that from the Zinchenko side of things, I just don't think this is very well timed. I think this should have probably come out after the window closed. And that's not, by the way, a slight at the publication because, they would, the Athletic would have been given these excerpts to publish at this point. So it's more so about the timing of when that decision has been made for these excerpts to come out at this point of the summer. I just think it's poorly timed. That's the bigger thing. The contradiction thing, that I'm up for debate on that. It's just the timing of when they're coming out. That's my biggest issue with the Zinchenko stuff. And AJ also said if a reasonable bid comes in for Zinchenko and he doesn't accept it, then he's not as ambitious as he claims. There's no place for him to fight in this team. Just on that Zinchenko side of things. Shaq says Gabriel Jesus back in training. That's our left wing signing. Is he back in training? I don't think he is he? He's certainly stepped up his rehabilitation, but the idea that he'd be back in training, I haven't seen that. Gabriel Jesus back doing some training on the grass. Well, of course, yeah, he would be doing some on the grass, but you remember Jurriën Timber started working on the grass in January, but didn't return until May. So that gives you an idea of where Gabriel Jesus is back. He's just doing some individual training at the moment, but I still think it would be some way off a main return, if you like, from making his return to the club. So yeah, that's that one. He's back on the grass. As I say, the good example here is that Jurriën Timber was back on the grass in January, but didn't return till May. So don't just immediately think that means he's going to be back soon, because it doesn't. Kakuri Smile says, I would like to see more of an aggressive club captain. I don't think it's worth upsetting the current team, but a leadership shake-up might galvanise performances. Patrick says, I always laugh when people say back on the grass as if it's a concrete as an alternative as well. I know. It's like a new signing, Gabriel Jesus. He's like a new signing to us. Franklin Goodwin says, Jesus won't be back until November at the earliest. If I had to guess, I think more likely December. If you think, January, February, March, April, May, that's 5 months. It's August, September, October, December, January. So December, January for Jesus is probably more accurate as an estimation of when we might get him back. Yeah, recovery does vary, says Just. I think you're absolutely right, mate. Recovery does definitely vary between people and players. Pete says Gyökeres played at the left wing at Brighton. Maybe it's something we could see at Arsenal. I doubt it, but who knows? Jason says you're allowed one more signing. Who is it going to be, Eze or a left winger? I mean, realistically, of the players that are on the move this summer, it's Eze. That's who I would add. I'd add that extra versatility, that extra quality, that extra match-winning ability, depth, competition to a number of roles. If we can go get someone, go get Eze, please. Owen says, who would you start at left back on Sunday? Calafiori. I would start Calafiori against Manchester United on Sunday. That would be my choice. I was been more impressed by him in pre-season than Lewis Skelly. I think they've both been good, but I think I'm slightly more inclined to lean towards Calafiori than Lewis Skelly at the moment. But it's great to have these two players. Absolutely wonderful. Ben says, Tom, I will not lie. I'm actually positive going into the season. However, what worries me the most is the appalling decisions going against us in the past few seasons. Me too, Ben. I am very concerned about the refereeing. As always, it's something that you can't help but be worried about these days. So, yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. David says, what about right back? I'd start with Ben White. Personally, I think Ben White's had a really good pre-season. I think he's been one of the better performers that we've had in pre-season. It's an interesting balance you have to find between Ben White and Calafiori, though. So that's something that maybe could dissuade me to thinking maybe Timber's the better one to start with Calafiori and White's the better one to start with Lewis Skelly. But I think White's earned that spot this summer, and I think Timber's got a job now to try and fight to win that spot back again. Aoife says every time in his career Gyökeres played on the left, he got moved then to the centre forward position because he's better there. Personally, I don't think there's any reason for him to play on the left this season. I think you're probably spot on. Zombie Scene says, Tom, what can we expect from your channel this weekend? Starting 11 reaction, final whistle reactions, pre-game talks, etc. I'm new here. Well, mate, of course, if you're new to the channel, you'll know that we do these shows every single day, 8 a.m., and we continue to do these shows at 8 a.m. throughout the whole of the season. Be that a match day, you'll see me either, at the Emirates or before the Emirates. Of course, you might see me from a hotel in Madrid or Paris, as we were last season doing these shows. But in terms of like specific shows around the games, I work match days. So I'm at the fixtures working. So we don't do shows while I'm at the games. But what we will be doing is, of course, the day before a game or the day of a game, we usually do our previews within the news show of the fixture. So on the morning of a game, when we do 8 a.m. shows, we'll be doing our starting 11 kind of predictions. And then from that, you'll see a post-match podcast usually drop the next morning at 8 a.m. But it's an 8 a.m. show. Is what we've done, and you'll see podcasts with guests, of course, as usual throughout the campaign as well. There is a TGT FPL league. I should probably get you that information if you want to join our FPL league for the new season. Let me see if I can put in the code on the screen for you. So the FPL code, and then I'll just go on to the league to make sure that we've got it, because it is set up. If you were already in the league, it should have been renewed for you. So if you're already in our fantasy football league, then you should already have seen it. Let me see if I can find it. No, not that one. I've got so many blooming fantasy leagues. Gooner Talk Fantasy League. That's the one. Configure league. Why is it so complicated? Why can't there just be a button that says, this is the league, go and do it? Of course, if you're in our Discord server, you can also join our special league. I have put our private league. I've put the code for that in the Discord server as well for our members. But this is the code. It's HYZO, not zero, the letter O, 9S. HYZO 9S. That is the code if you would like to join the league. We currently have in that league a silly number of people. Yes, that's new players to be added to the league already. We've got quite a few of you, but yeah, we usually have a lot of people. I think we had over 1,000 in there last season easily. So if you haven't yet joined that league, there's your code. Join the league. Good luck to all of you that enter. Mess or Raf, who's changed his name now to Mess or Raf. No longer Messy Raf, says, when we bringing back the player rating show I know we need. I wish I could, Raf, but I'm so busy these days around match days that it becomes so very difficult. On home games, even a 3 o'clock kickoff, I'm not getting home till really late in the evening from the Emirates. So it's become quite tricky. But if things change, we can bring it back. We can do something around that, I'm sure. Ben says, I think we need to get some sort of shocking device for Arteta to stay on the sideline next season. I think everyone hates us for his antics. Let them hate us, mate. They hate us because they hate us. And it's really as simple as that. From a point of view that kind of around Arteta and rival fans, I've said this before, I'll keep saying it, I'll say it constantly over and over and over and over again. The only reason rival fans hate on Arteta is because they are desperate for him to leave Arsenal. They want you to hate him. They want you to want him out. They want you to want Arteta gone because he is the biggest threat to Arsenal beating them 2 pieces of silverware and being the competitive team that they have become. So just remember that. Anyway, that's going to bring us to the end of today's show. I think we've discussed some quite interesting topics today, some divisive topics, certainly on the Zinchenko and the Tony Adams captaincy comments. Let us know your thoughts. Keep it respectful, as always. And also, try and quote correctly. If you disagree with something I say, absolutely no problem with that. But just quote correctly. There was someone yesterday, we did a show with Sophie yesterday. If you've not yet checked that out, please go and give that a listen. But there was a comment on the show saying, I can't believe Tom's predicted Arsenal to finish third. I never said in the show that I predicted us to finish third. I just said I think we're third favourites behind Man City and Liverpool. But it's my honest belief I think we can win the league this year. So that's what I'm going with. So, yeah, but just make sure you quote correctly when you're going into that comment section. But thank you, as always, for tuning in. Really appreciate your time. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your week, and I'll be back with you tomorrow morning, as usual, to break down anything else. If you are a TalkSport listener, I will be there around 4 o'clock. There's a big Premier League season preview with loads of different fans from different fan channels as part of the fan network at TalkSport, as which we are, of course, the Arsenal representative for the fan network over there. So if you are a TalkSport listener, and even if you're not a TalkSport listener and you want to hear kind of this big preamble before the Premier League season, that is today. It's around 4 o'clock, maybe slightly before that. So chuck TalkSport on at 4 o'clock UK time and listen to the big pre-Premier League show that I'll be on over there. But yeah, have an absolutely fantastic rest of the day. Enjoy yourself. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.